Across all forms of media, parody is a particular breed of comedy that's always been hard to handle. A good satire can point out flaws in the source material, make you view it in a new light, or maybe even give you a greater appreciation of it. As the years go on though, the rotting corpse that is parody only seems to smell worse and worse. Nearly every spoof film in recent memory is just a bunch of gross out humor with references thrown in so that the audience can be like,
"Oh hey, I recognize that, it's funny because they said a thing and I understood the reference and that makes it fun."
And many TV shows that thrive off of satirizing current events or celebrities are now well past their prime. So while the art form may seem like it's died in popular media, the best place where you can go to get your satirical fix is right here on YouTube. But given how hard it is to make a living off of animating and some of the shaky copyright rules, even the internet can't be perfect. Now, you probably already know all of this because Nostalgia Critic made a video about it, but something that is rarely ever discussed is musical satire. I'm not talking about artists that straight up change the lyrics of an existing song like Weird Al or the thousands of Minecraft parodies on YouTube or whatever these are. I'm talking about original music that pokes fun at certain events, other genres, or a time in musical history. I think the reason this doesn't get discussed as often is because it's usually more difficult to tell when a piece of music is supposed to be making fun of another versus when a film or TV show is. For example, many people have labeled Kesha's early work as being a parody of late 2000s dance music for how overabundant the auto-tuned bass and lyrics about partying are, almost exaggerating the genre's extremities in a way that's popular enough to catch on. In fact, she kinda ended up putting the sound on the map to begin with. You can also look at artists like Meatloaf or Ween who have such an extreme knack for campiness that a record like Bad Outta Hell could be seen as a parody of rock operas that came before it, or various Ween songs sounding like spoofs of whatever genre the respective track is. These are interesting things to think about and can give a deeper appreciation to music that might not take itself too seriously on the surface, but I want to talk about instances where the satire is very blatant.
The first and likely the biggest example that I want to talk about is the one and only Mr. Frank Zappa, an artist who quickly garnered a ton of praise in the independent rock scene after him and his band signed to The Verve in 1966, releasing their debut album Freak Out later that year. This album quickly got passed around in the underground for not only being one of the first double LPs in rock at the time, but for how unique the music was. The first of the two LPs, while sounding very akin to rising psych rock trends at the time, was full of lyrics that either made very blunt social commentary or just made fun of popular music. Hearing somebody sing about America's poor treatment of the youth and the lower class over an optimistic instrumental with a xylophone and a slightly distorted guitar, or the numerous tracks written to sound similar to popular love songs but go in the complete opposite direction, really make the first bulk of the album pretty hilarious. You might think that it'd come off as dated given how these sounds aren't really relevant nowadays, yet the music on here somehow aged better than most of his contemporaries. As for the rest of this record, it gets, weird. But don't worry, it's still good. While Freak Out did a good job at making fun of American pop culture, Zappa truly struck gold when he started going after counterculture. The Mother's third album, We're Only In It For The Money, is quite easily the ultimate counterculture album. Okay, we can't go much further without acknowledging the album art. I mean, damn, just look at this thing. A near perfect recreation of Sgt. Pepper's with a ton of funny details like the band being dressed in women's clothing as opposed to the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's outfits, and the band's name being written in vegetables instead of flowers, and oh hey, it's Jimi Hendrix. The only unfortunate thing about this album art is that when the album first came out, the label feared that they'd be sued by Apple Records for obvious reasons. So they switched out the inner gatefold and the front cover. Luckily, it's been repressed since with the cover art fixed, and wow, the packaging of this thing does not disappoint. Everything from the gatefold, back cover, and even the little insert that comes with the record is perfectly recreated. Unfortunately, I don't have a physical copy of Sgt. Pepper's to do a live side-by-side comparison of, which probably says something about my music taste. Anyway, enough gushing about the presentation. Does the actual content of the album live up to it? Absolutely. Not only are most of the songs on here written with the right chords and key signatures to recreate the Beatles' sound, but the lyrics are even more clever than they were on Freak Out. For as much fun as the album likes to have impersonating hippies and making fun of counterculture, it does just as much in the way of showing its dark sides. That lightning bolt on the cover is there for a reason. The album starts off kinda silly, with songs like Who Needs the Peace Corps, Concentration Moon, and Bowtie Daddy being lighthearted cuts where Zappa impersonates hippies. In between moments like these are songs like Mom and Dad and Harry You're a Beast, which come at the topic from a more serious angle, communicating how the heavy drug usage does nothing but hurt what the movement stands for. This balance of light jabs and harsh criticism stays true throughout the entire album, and uses motifs such as telephone calls and a very obvious reoccurring Beatles parody to communicate a slow downfall, all building up towards the album's final track, which is 6 minutes of various real-world noises strung together into one piece. Zappa would go on to make fun of the disco fad as well in 1976 with his album Zoot Allures, and while it is funny, it doesn't really offer anything much deeper than an exaggerated take on the sound. While we're on the topic of experimental music though, the next band that I want to talk about is The Residents.
This band is maybe more well known for how they present themselves physically than their actual music, not because it's bad though, hell I already got a thumbnail ready for a video on Duckstab, it's just that, well, they sound like this. Throughout their entire career, they managed to keep all their identities a secret, or at least tried their best. I heard the founding member actually passed away earlier this year, so rest in peace. These creatures challenged the norm of what could be done in music, and was fully aware of how ridiculous they sounded. So much so that the cover art of their very first album, Meet the Residents, is an obvious parody of Meet the Beatles. These things just never stop, do they? Much like We're Only In It For The Money, the cover fits the actual music. It's like they took the Meet the Beatles cover art and doodled all over it, symbolically saying, yeah, this is gonna be nothing like that. It's also kind of funny how it reads, the first album by North Louisiana's phenomenal pop combo, because if you couldn't guess by now, it sounds like this. The satire of this album kind of starts and ends there though, as the record plays out like one seamless avant-garde piece of music that if you switch the title and cover would probably make the same amount of sense. The same can't be said for the band's 7th album though, as now we've gone commercial. Their 1980 project, The Commercial Album, consists of 40 tracks that are each exactly 1 minute long, except on streaming services where they add an extra 6 seconds of silence to each song. Why? The idea is that each song is supposed to be repeated 3 times in order to create what they view as a commercial track. It's a pretty hilarious and undeniably unique way of saying that they think all pop music is repetitive garbage, but taking that out of context and just looking at the music, I feel this album's gimmick works against it more than it helps. Many of these songs, especially the ones that are just instrumentals, sound like a small fragment of what could be a great track if it only had more time to flesh itself out. The album's at its best when the songs immediately hit you with an off-kilter yet catchy and repetitive melody like Give It to Someone Else or Amber, as not only do they get their job done in 60 seconds, but feel even more fitting to the whole pop music spoofage that the album is presenting. This is overall a pretty good album and definitely a high point for satirical music, but far from the best album the band's released, let alone experimental albums as a whole.
Alright, enough talking about music that'll make you lose friends if you tell them you like it. Let's spin the wheel of genres and see what we get next. Oh, hip-hop. Okay. Well, hip-hop music that intentionally exaggerated stereotypes and had a tongue-in-cheek attitude really goes back to the 80s. We can look at Two Live Crew and Too Short as obvious examples, but it's difficult to really label any of these as being satirical given how early the genre was in its lifespan. So many artists were still experimenting and seeing what worked and what didn't for the genre, and so a concrete formula that was easy to criticize and make fun of didn't really exist yet. Hip-hop satire wouldn't even begin to peak until the internet! Nowadays it's pretty easy to become huge off of making novelty rap songs. I mean, Old Town Road just set the record for most weeks at #1 on the Hot 100, and I totally just dated this video by saying that. The earliest example of a significant meme rapper that I can think of is Viper, and if you thought that E40 was the most prolific artist in hip-hop, then you haven't heard of Viper. This guy has well over 1,000 albums under his belt since debuting in 2006, and granted many of them are just songs he's already released but with different names or slight changes like being slowed down or reversed, but still, geez dude. By far his most popular project is his 2008 album with the glorious title, Yo Cowards Don't Even Smoke Crack, and it's pretty cool. Considering this came out in 2008 before the whole cloud rap and even the lo-fi hip-hop wave was really much of a thing, this album went about making hip-hop in a completely different way. I gotta say though, once you've heard one Viper song, you've kinda heard them all. While I do appreciate how ahead of the curve Viper's sound was for his time and how still nobody else really sounds like him, I find it much more entertaining to just look through all his album arts than actually taking the time to listen to them. My favorites have to be Cops Can't Read 4, Kill Yourself My Man, and Straight Out of the Galactic M Viper 6. Yes, there are 5 other ones. While Viper may be an essential figure for internet meme rap, the true king has to be our one and only bass god Lil B. This guy is a very polarizing character because he goes about releasing music in a way that's unlike most artists. Much like Viper, he has a very prolific output with a hefty amount of mixtapes, many of them being a direct parody of 2000s bling era rap. The beats are overblown, the lyrics are dumb, but it's all delivered with a very intentional sense of humor. You could appreciate it as a parody or just see it as a dumb excuse to make bad music, but what separates Lil B from other music shitposters is that he can actually make unironically good music when he wants to. Tapes like God's Father, Six Kiss, and I'm Gay actually are really well written and well produced hip hop projects that handle the Lil B aesthetic in a way that's more tasteful. Many people have labeled him as the Tommy Wiseau of hip-hop, but I'd probably still give that to Viper. If there's one artist who got hip-hop satire entirely right though, it has to be Travis Miller, aka Bedwetter, aka Cat Torso, aka this guy even made a black metal album, aka Little Ugly Mane. While many of the projects released under this moniker delve off into existential dread or just straight experimental hip-hop, his 2012 album Mista Thug Isolation has become an internet rap classic.
Not only was it one of the first albums to gain a sizable following entirely off of being passed around online, but it's an absolutely genius album from front to back. It's an exaggerated take on hip-hop, more specifically the Memphis scene, which had a heavy emphasis on horrific themes and darker production. Throw in some elements of with the down-pitched vocals and strange sampling, and what you have is a celebration of southern hip-hop with a bit of a tongue-in-cheek demeanor. You can tell that Travis has a very deep knowledge and appreciation of the kind of music he's creating, with well-constructed flows and detailed production. Also, this guy worked with Denzel Curry before anyone knew who Denzel Curry was, so that's cool too. If you're a fan of hip-hop and haven't heard this album, I definitely recommend you do so, especially if you like the Memphis scene. Okay, we got time for one more genre, so let's see what we get next. Oh, metal. Well, metal's a bit trickier than other genres, because its insular, over-the-top subgenres kind of speak for themselves. Extreme metal bands are aware of their own absurdity, so there's not much of a point in parodying it. I mean, arguably the most popular death metal band in the world, Cannibal Corpse, got their popularity off of having such overly grotesque album arts and abrasive music, to the point where they almost come off as a parody of themselves. We could cherry-pick bands like Lawnmower Death or that Adult Swim thing from 2007, but those bands suffer from a little thing I like to call not being good. There's really only one band that I think gets this entirely right, and they've no doubt gotten a great deal of recognition for it. Ghost is one of, if not the most popular metal band of the past several years, and kinda unsurprisingly so. They have a knack for maintaining a sound that's retro and accessible for fans of already popular heavy metal, while still being refreshing enough for newer audiences. They do this by writing songs that are genuinely well-composed, well-paced, and catchy enough for a mainstream audience, but have a level of quirk that hasn't been seen in metal for decades, at least in the realm of true blue heavy metal. They've managed to push themselves even further with each new album release. Not you! And they've only been gaining more traction since they started. Opus Eponymous, while not the band's best produced or refined album, showed off all the potential they had. The gothic church themes combined with the catchy melodies and campy vocalists gave the band a unique sound that allowed them to satirize while also appreciate the early years of heavy metal. What they remind me of the most is the 80s new wave of British heavy metal, as well as the band Merciful Fate. The sounds that they tried on this album would become more fully realized with better production, songwriting, and a grander instrumental palette on their 2015 album Meliora, which is easily their best one yet in my opinion. If you're looking for something that pays tribute but also acknowledges the absurdities of old school heavy metal, then you've probably heard this already. But if that wasn't campy enough for you, then look no further than their 2016 EP Pope Star. This thing's got heavy metal covers of 80s pop songs on it. What more could you want? So to wrap this video up, I think that musical comedy spans much more than just straight novelty acts. It's possible to communicate satire just through sound, with lyrics acting merely as a reinforcement. Did I miss any bands? I'm sure I did. Comment telling me what I missed and how wrong I am, but no matter what you think, I appreciate you watching.
What's the matter? It's endless, all I see is still this week. Just not